Good morning, everyone. It is my great pleasure to introduce the last session for this segment on heat and work. We've been hearing a lot of different topics on heat at work, and we're now going to zoom in on case studies and research findings related to the sports sector, in innovation and technology, and public policy. So without further ado, I'm going to call up our first speaker, Ms. Delphine Fong, who is going to speak to us on heat stress management in sports.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Delphine, and I'm from Sports Singapore. So Sports Singapore is a statutory board that promotes sports and taking care of the entire sports fraternity. Okay, for the past year, these are some of the news articles that you see in the papers. Mercury rising, record hot temperatures, Singapore may be hotter in 2024, and a hotter Singapore will change how we work and live. And you can also read in the papers as well, hot weather causes rise in heat injury cases, worsens skin conditions. And in the last 10-chart marathon that was just held a month ago, last month, there were an increased number of heat injury victims. So something that we have to look at and what we can do about it. I want to share two case studies that will pick up with regards to heat injury. So this incident happened in 2016, where this 29-year-old New Zealander was participating in the marathon. He collapsed and he died of heat stroke. Okay, and from court documents, it was stated that he was not properly acclimatized to the local climate and high humidity and had not run for 3 weeks before the race. So training for a marathon is very important. There's another incident, but it's a more successful case in the sense that he actually resumed normal life. And it was also in the papers as well. Okay, so this student was 14 years old when he collapsed during rugby training, and it was 9 o'clock in the morning. All right, so his mother received a phone call to say that the son had collapsed due to a heat stroke injury. And he had to overcome many challenges over the next few months because the doctors told the mother that he had multiple organ failure. And it took a couple of months, and he has since resumed normal life. Today, he is actually pursuing his degree in a local university. So what does Sport SG do? Okay, so we actually manage all the public facilities in Singapore, including swimming pools, outdoors, and most of our swimming pools are outdoors. Stadiums, fields, soccer fields, hockey pitches, and netball and tennis courts. And we also support the 64 National Sports Association in Singapore. Our stakeholders comprises athletes, participants, and parents and the community, coaches, officials, and we have staff that are deployed at the swimming pool, the lifeguards. Okay, so what do we do and how do we create awareness of heat injury prevention for the sports fraternity? So I would like to share with you some of the collaterals that we have. You can see from the screen, we have this heat management and UV protection guide, which we actually introduced in 2016. We work with the agencies, other agencies also, to have this managing heat stress poster, and we want to use a consistent image and messaging so that people are not confused by the information itself. And in fact, in 2015, we actually have a UV protection guide for SEA Games. So for us, outreach and education is very important. If you talk to anybody who plays sports, okay, majority of them will tell you how to prevent heat injury is to drink more water. And we don't want them to think that way, because there are many more mitigating measures as well. All right, and we have a heat stress management plan that we put in our website, not just for Sport SG, but for people who are event organizers, who are sports association who organizes activities for the fraternity. So in this plan, I want to cover some of the salient points. We do educate them on the early recognition and intervention, the signs of heat exhaustion and the signs of heat stroke, and what you should do when you notice such signs. And for simplicity, actually, we have also break it down into 3 columns with low heat stress, moderate heat stress, and high heat stress. So, and this is a live document, which means that we actually sort of upgrade it, enhance it when we have new information, whether from researchers or from work groups that we are represented in Singapore. And of course, for sports facilities, if the temperature gets too high, we may close some of the outdoor facilities between 11 to 4 o'clock, and also encourage them to exercise indoors or in sheltered spaces. And with all the preventative measures, we also want to educate people on how to handle first aid treatment for heat injury. So they have the 6 R's: rest the victim, remove the clothing, reduce the temperature, rehydrate, resuscitate, and rush to hospital. Okay, and what is interesting is that the latest one that we have done is to develop a code of practice for sports safety. So this code of practice, which is a Singapore standard, was published in 2022. Again, it's a live document, because as long as we have new information, we will pull the document up, upgrade it, and then we will distribute it to the community. So it started off from the Sports Safety Committee more than 10 years ago, and then we translate the recommendations to a code of practice. And in the code of practice, there's a chapter dedicated to heat injuries. And of course, we also promote risk management in sport. That means in whatever activities you do, you have to conduct a risk assessment, because you have different profile of participants, you have different profile of coaches as well, and you have a different intensity of the activity itself. At the bottom there, you can see is the Get Active questionnaire. It's a pre-screening tool to check if the person is ready to be more active. And in the chapter for heat injury in the code of practice, there is also a checklist of intrinsic risk factors for exertional heat stroke. So it's actually 6 questions, as you can see it. The first question talks about the fitness level of the person. The second question talks about acclimatization. The third and fourth question talks about the medical conditions. And of course, it's a reminder, does the participant push himself to the limits? And lastly, are you at risk of heat injury? So these questions are meant to bring awareness to the participant, to the person exercising, to be cautious and to be aware of heat injury. Okay, I will run through now what is covered in the chapter of heat injury in the Code of Practice, a Singapore standard. Although the Code of Practice in Singapore for sports is not mandatory, that means agencies are not mandated to implement it, but the courts do use it as a reference point for benchmarking of best practices. Okay, so you can see, right, the importance of progressive training, heat acclimatization, and early identification of risk factors. And of course, the first responder intervention is important because for higher chance of survival. So we also emphasize a lot on early recognition. In one incident when where this organizers was organizing this tennis competition, and the lady collapsed, it was around 11 o'clock, and they assumed that she was suffering from heat injury and sort of, raise her legs, cool her down. In fact, actually, she was suffering a cardiac arrest, yeah. So I think the recognition of symptoms and signs are very important in a collapse case. The next one you can see is about how to prevent. So we go on the angle of preventative measures first. Signs and symptoms, understanding heat acclimatization, and many people who play sports, if you ask them, they will tell you, okay, I drink a lot of water to prevent heat injury, but drinking water is not the only thing, and we don't want to make it sound simplistic. We want them to understand that it's life-threatening, it can lead to a multiple organ failure, and then it's better that you prevent it, and if it happens, then you must know how to treat it. Yeah, so understand heat acclimatization is very important, and how long the guidelines are given there. The Code of Practice also covers the use of protective and heat-trapping clothing, and if you do that, you must be aware, and there must be, more mitigating measures, yeah? And also training during the hotter hours. So for athletes, some of them train during the hotter hours to be acclimatized. And again, what can they do besides, fluid replacement? Okay, so again, recognition is important. It's been repeatedly mentioned in the Code of Practice. And the 9.3 clause talks about individual responsibility. And we always, as we become more affluent, right, if there's any incidents, what they will do is that they will take on a legal approach, towards the organizer, the people who plan the activities, instead of taking individual responsibility, especially to their fitness level and their state of health. So in the code of practice, we do emphasize about individual responsibility and that they must know their fitness level. So there are also guidelines for training and competitions, as you can see. They must take proactive steps to minimize excessive heat accumulation. And again, we repeat, pay attention to early symptoms of overtraining and illness. The next one, you can see there are measures, preventive measures for coaches and event organizers. And really, coaches, they can play a big role in educating their participants about heat injury, or even telling them how to prevent injury by, advising them on the proper attire, on hydration, and, any other alternative measures that they can take to prevent heat injuries. And of course, when they go to secondary, it's about mitigating measures, okay, the cooling facilities, the water stations, and finally, the tertiary prevention, which is the emergency response. Okay, the same guideline is also for medical personnel, right? Let me just go to the next slide, okay? Yep, and this is for medical personnel. Again, the primary prevention is all about advisory, awareness, education, and then secondary prevention, detection, how we look at the signs and symptoms, and of course, treatment as well. Okay, in 9.5.3, the clause, again, immediate responding to the victim is important. And also, there should be equipment, items, and plans to execute body cooling immediately, such as water immersion and implementation of body cooling procedures, and also the decision on return to play. Yeah, so as you can see from the earlier case study, right, where the young boy, 14 years old, he has to go through many months of recovery before he can resume normal life. Okay, there's also a paragraph on risks of overhydration that leads to water intoxication, and some of the recommendations with regards to fluid intake, yeah, which is covered in the next clause. Yeah. And very important, actually, in sports, we encourage all the coaches, event organizers, facility owners, I'm referring to sports facility owners, that they must conduct a risk assessment for their facility as well as for the activity itself. And in conducting the risk assessment, they should cover areas like what we call PEEP. So what does PEEP stand for? People, the profile of people, the equipment that is being used, the environment, whether it's indoor, outdoors, sheltered, or even the process itself in terms of emergency response, how quick they should react to that victim. Okay, so these are some of the risks that we look at: personal risk, environmental risk, and other risks as well. And if you look at the guidelines for physical activities, if the WBGT reaches more than 33, then they should adopt a 15-30 minutes physical activity and 30 minutes. Again, these are guidelines, but if they practice other measures as well, then they, this table will just provide a guideline to the organizers with regards to the activity and rest ratio. Okay, the next one will be my last slide. Now, we are, because as I've mentioned earlier, the code of practice is not mandatory. It's something that the organizers must want to adopt it. So we are proposing a sport safety mark. We are in the process of developing this mark. It's like an ISO. If you adopt the best practices from the code of practice, you will be given a sport safety mark. You will be recognized, and it provides a kind of assurance to the participants that you have adopted safety measures. And as I've mentioned earlier, the code of practice has a chapter on heat injury. So it is important that they must have preventative measures with regards to heat injury to be able to have to be awarded with the sport safety mark. So this is something like they will be audited with regards to the documents, with regards to the event itself, that they have implemented the measures, and it will be audited on a 2-year basis, every 2-year basis to get a mark. And if an accident happens, the mark will be suspended and investigation will be carried out. And if it's due to other reasons other than negligence, then the mark will be reinstated again. So this is something that we are looking at, and we hope that over the next couple of years we are able to introduce it to the industry. Okay, so I think that safety is everyone's responsibility, and we want to promulgate that. In playing sports or working in hotel environments, they have to think safe, and then they look at the mitigating measures, they play safe, and of course, to stay safe, especially after many years of exercising, they think that, okay, I don't need to do something like that because I'm acclimatized, I have done all this before. So we want them to continue to stay safe and look at other mitigating measures as well. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, so we've heard a lot about a code and accreditation from Sport Singapore. Now we're going to look at innovation and technology. My next speaker is Dr. Ken Tokizawa, a senior researcher from the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health in Japan. And he's going to give us a presentation on novel practical body cooling techniques and wearable measurements for core temperature in occupational heat exposure. Okay, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Liu. I'm honored to be here, and thanks to organizing committee. And I'd like to present our presentation. One is practical body cooling techniques, and another is wearable measurement for core temperature. And before the two topics, I'd like to introduce humid heat in Japan. Japan is located far north from Southeast Asia, not so far, from flight from Tokyo to Singapore, 8 hours. Japan has 4 seasons, so now in winter, it's very cold, but as shown here, ambient temperature from July to September in 2023, ambient temperature reached highest 35 degrees Celsius, and at night, the minimum air temperature over 25 degrees Celsius. This slide shows the hottest day in last year, 2024, at Tokyo, as a representative of summer day. The green lines shows ambient temperature start from 27 degrees Celsius and during daytime reaches 35 degrees Celsius. And also WBGT, wet bulb globe temperature, also reached 35 degrees Celsius, and at night over 25 degrees Celsius. This is humid heat in Japan, and in last 15 years, daytime average WBGT in Tokyo gradually increased, especially in 2023 and 24. These tendencies are obvious in wet bulb temperature and globe temperature, and not so ambient temperature. This trend has been shown, reported in 2023 in Nature, humid heat. And the study showed urban dry heat island changes to humid heat in last 20 years, not dry heat. But around the green area, including Southeast Asia and Japan, high rainfall areas. This slide shows the who are on emergency transport for heat-related illness. The number gradually increased, and the last year, 2024, is the highest record in Japan. And more than half from the home of older people, and 20% of the transportation was from the workplace. And similar trends are workers' compensations for heat-related illness, and construction and manufacturing account for half, and followed by agriculture and transportation. Move on to the next topic, body cooling techniques. This illustrates some kind of personal cooling garments. Left one is very special, but high resources and low mobility on the earth, but perfect control of thermoregulation. And liquid cooling techniques devices using a coolant or iced water, relatively high resources, needs AC power and mobile batteries and the weight. Then ice pack cooling vest and ventilation garments, low resource and high mobility, but less effective. And considering that it is widely distributed to the many workers and at several workplaces, low resource and high mobility should be given priority. So these devices should be improved. So we focused on ventilation garments. Fans are attached on the jacket because in recent years in Japan, many construction and manufacturing workers wear these type of ventilation garments. However, several studies show that the efficacy of ventilation garments were limited to reducing skin temperature and thermal perception, and not core temperature, small effects, and heart rate and labor productivity. Ventilation garments consist of two types of heat loss, heat dissipation. One is convective heat loss by wind of fans, and another is evaporative heat loss by sweat. To increase these heat losses, is sweat enough? And ventilation garments can evaporate more water. So we came up with the idea that wetting in the t-shirts to increase evaporation. So we evaluated the effects of wetting t-shirts, wetting t-shirts and ventilation garments, and also in dry t-shirts and ventilation garments. In the control condition, dry t-shirts and fanning off. The subjects were young males and older males. In both groups, and rectal temperature as core temperature, the increase was significantly lowered in wet dryer than in controlled and dry dryer. Also in heart rate and sweat rate, the indicator of the dehydration, the findings were obtained in 37 degrees Celsius and 50% relative humidity. And we confirmed in the heat condition of 40 degrees Celsius and 30% RH and 32 degrees Celsius and 80% RH. Furthermore, thermal perception and thermal comfort were improved by wet. Therefore, combination of waiting T-shirts and ventilation garments is effective and practical cooling technique to mitigate some physiological and perceptual responses. This matrix chart shows the critical environmental limits for electric fan use during hot work in 2022. Red shows don't use fans, it's harmful. And yellow is minimal effect. And green shows use fans, it's effective. The combination of relative humidity and air temperature is important, not only air temperature. So we have to make this matrix for ventilation garments and combination of water soaked in the T-shirts in near future. Move on to third topics, wearable measurements for core temperature. As you know, bioengineering advances in non-invasive sensors technologies, including miniaturization, and makes it possible to provide individualized prediction of safe thermal work limits. Since an increase in body core temperature is a leading indicator of heat-related illness, the limits of increase will help in deciding whether to continue working. The ISO defines the limits of core temperature 38 or 38.5 degrees. But at present, systems that accurately measure body core temperature using wearable devices has yet to be determined. One wearable device named Cora is currently available and using heat flux method for estimation. There were validation studies and showed error range limits of agreement 0.5 or 0.4 degrees Celsius. Because range of core temperature is narrow, so under 0.3 degree is ideal. To estimate body core temperature, zero heat flux method is classical, but it's a stable measurement for medical use. At present, heat flow means heat flux means heat flow from the core to the skin, and the heater of the device on the skin makes it zero temperature differences between skin and core. And dual heat flux method 2 point of heat flow is proposed 2010, which no need to set a heater or AC power for the estimation. So makes it suitable for the wearable devices, but not currently commercialized. So we have newly developed patch type sensor using a dual heat flux method with healthcare and semiconductor company. We had validation studies using 57 volunteers performed a 6 to 90 minutes exercise protocol, and we measured invasive body core temperature, esophageal and rectal temperature compared with predicted temperature. And the protocol was a variety of exercise mode was walking and cycling and arm cranking while wearing standard work uniform or protective clothing at ambient temperature 30 to 40 degrees Celsius. This graph shows the part of the validation studies and between predicted temperature and esophageal temperature limits of agreement 0.3 degrees. But we need to check the around 38, 39 or 40 degrees Celsius. But we had a medical certification in Japan in last year, but now for medical use in hospitals. So for occupational fields, we need to develop a management system and application. As summary, humid heating is an increasing threat in Japan as with Southeast Asia. The combination of wet inner T-shirts and ventilation garments could be an effective and practical body cooling during work. But instead, several options as techniques needed for special works. And individualized predictions of safe thermal work limits have become a reality, but useful and accurate wearable devices are needed. And finally, our institute, JNIOSH, published academic journal, Industrial Health, now call for papers entitled Protecting Working People from Heat Stress from Numerical Simulations and Physiology to Collective Bargaining and Legislations. Deadline is June 30, so it means 6 months. So please welcome to submit our journal and listed many topics, occupational health in heat. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ken, for your fascinating research on ventilation garments and sensors. We're now going to take a little bit of a different slant, looking at more policy-level macro solutions. Our next speaker is Prof Cai Wenjia, a professor of Department of Earth System Science in Tsinghua University. And she's going to talk about the economic impacts of climate change-related health risks. Over to you.
Many thanks for the introduction. It's my great honor to be here. And as the moderator just mentioned, I would like to take another approach to illustrate my understanding to this issue, this very important issue. My own background is environmental economics. I was one of the delegation to the Chinese delegation to UN climate change negotiation, and I also work for Lancet Countdown Asia, who produced this annual report on climate change and human health. And I think our common knowledge here in this meeting is that climate change is affecting our health from multiple channels, including direct and indirect ways, and heat is one of our key topics here today. But I think we also need to be aware that to trigger more changes and to find more solutions or practical solutions to trigger these changes, some of those key people that we do need to talk to is not in this room. Because at least in China, to my understanding, some of the key policymakers, they rest in Department of Planning, or we call it the National Development Reform Commission, and also some also rest in the Finance Department, although we do have the lucky to have some people from international banks yesterday. But I do think that when we need to make these changes happen, we really need to talk to people from different disciplines and people who work in different departments. So in that way, in that sense, we really need to find a common language for people to understand that the best science that we already find here. So why an economic lenses would be important and could play some role to leverage those actions. I think first, for those people who are not public health professionals or who are not physiologists, those economic lenses could help us to understand the scale of impacts. because they are faced with different research findings from different disciplines who always think themselves to be one of the most important and urgent things to be considered. So with the economic lenses, we can help them to compare from different aspects of impacts, even under the huge scope of impacts from climate change, we can still identify those ones that are most important. And the second one is, among all these different solutions that we could take to tackle with the climate change-related health impacts, what are those that we should prioritize? And this is something we really need to think when we face limited resources. And the third one is, we already see a lot of new market opportunities outside. But when we want to encourage more private investment, what can we tell them? We can tell them about the future market scales, and we can also help them identify measures that can offer a really attractive return investment, so that we don't simply rely on those public investment, but we can also trigger in more private interest into join our joint efforts. So broadly speaking, when we talk about how the health impacts from climate change affect the economy, we would usually find these chains. The overall gray boxes is something which I think you are much more familiar with than me. But after we have got those mortality and morbidity results from heat, and even when they don't have these strong symptoms, but they feel like heat discomfort, that will cause those reduced labor productivity. So all these would lead to direct economic impacts. For example, those people who pay more for their treatment costs and who will suffer from those income losses, and at the industrial or sectoral level, they will also experience those output losses. And for insurance company, when they face more more illnesses from those heat-related symptoms, they will also need to pay more insurance expenditures. So not only for the companies, but also for the government expenditure, they will also face a rise in this. So different kinds of economic impacts will occur to different departments in the economy. And if the people has the unfortunate death outcomes, then we will also face with the reduced labor supply and also reduction in the welfare. So this is the direct economic impacts. But we also want to know that those sectors that have been severely affected by heat, they are also in a supply chain in the overall economy. So to their upstream sectors, such as when we consider the labor productivity loss in wheat production, they are the key contributor to the wheat output. So if we have less labor productivity input into the sector, we will have less wheat output. And then we will have less demand for the fertilizers, and also we will produce less flour output. So you see how this different economic impacts could flow to their upstream and also downstream sectors, which will have an overall indirect and macroeconomic scale impacts on GDP, on physical expenditure, and even on employment. So this is something which have been, comparatively speaking, well-established links, as shown on the blue links in this figure. However, we also see that those climate change not only have direct impacts on these epidemiological results and also lead to those direct and indirect economic impacts, as I just mentioned, those climate-induced impacts on GDP, on the income, could also have some indirect ways to affect on the epidemiological effects. For example, those people who have less income, they are usually more vulnerable and take up a higher share in those health impacts, and also they will suffer from more economic losses in this chain. However, we seldomly calculate these boxes marked in red color. So it really means that we still have a long journey to depict an overall picture of how the overall economic impacts would look like. Yeah, so if we could really have a comprehensive picture on this, that would really benefit the discussion. So how is the current status of the research? We have searched the literatures starting from year 2020 to 2024 because we already see some previous reviews who have done this. So we have focused on the most recent ones. You could see that most of the literatures, they are focusing on heat, and which is quite relevant to the audience today. And some of the research, they also focus on the cold effects on economy and also the impact of wildfire on economy. And most of the studies right now, they focused on global and national scale. Well, fewer ones were conducted at the subnational and city level. But I know that we mentioned several times well, yesterday and also today about the need to have a really specific research outcomes for a final resolution so that we know that this impact is specifically on me and I have to take some specific measures to reduce that. So more final resolution results would also be benefit for those policy changes. So what are the key findings out from those researchers? The first one is we find that overall the economic losses are substantial and they are rapidly growing. So among all different aspects from climate change, for example, like droughts and floods, wildfires, heat, and typhoon. So the largest economic losses can be attributed to heat. So more than half of the losses would come from heat. So this is a study from the World Economic Forum published last year. And among all these impacts from the health impacts, the majority of them come from the labor productivity loss, where they are directly linked with the structural output and the added value, or the GDP of the whole overall economy. And some share of that was caused by the treatment cost. And the second layer of finding would be how these costs are distributed. So we find that they are very much unequally distributed among regions, where you see Asia suffer the largest loss from the overall cost, and it is about 13 times of the economic losses in Southwest Pacific. And across different sectors, we all mentioned about agriculture, we all mentioned about construction. And here in this study, we find that construction sector will suffer the most, reaching 2.1 by year 2050, and which is like twice the scale of the sectors, of the services sectors. And it's also being distributed unequally across populations. And the third findings is that mortality is something we really have like a better database to make research on. But morbidity, they usually have a larger negative impact on economy than mortality. So the same study from World Economic Forum, they mentioned that only 21% of the health impacts from climate change will be attributed to mortality, while the rest, the more than or almost 80%, could be attributed to mortality. And the other two studies also compared these mortality and morbidity economic losses, and they all have the similar conclusions. So what I want to summarize is that we certainly need economic studies to help us understand the scale and how they are distributed among different sectors and regions. And we also need more subnational and also city-level results to help us identify the results that are most relevant to me. And the other thing I really want to emphasize is that when we talk to different stakeholders, we really need to choose the right metric. So when you're talking to those national level decision makers, GDP is something that they could easily understand. But if you're talking to some industrial owners or production, or like the firm owners, maybe if you could elaborate, well, this climate change will have this impact on health and will have a direct impact on your production output or the money or the profit you earned each year. And for insurance company, maybe if you could talk up more about the insurance claims and also the related indicators, that would be the most effective. And for individuals, they don't care about GDP. Well, GDP is something at the national level. They would care more about the income. So we really need to talk about either income or their own healthcare expenditure that will help them realize how important and how severe this problem is. And how can we make use of the economic analysis to help us identify the solutions? I think these are at least 3 areas that we could use to help us find the solutions. The first one is that in climate change economics, we have a very useful tool which is called social cost of carbon, where we used to elaborate how much is the externality levied by 1 ton of CO2 emissions on our economy. So this indicator has been widely used by a lot of countries to define their environmental and also climate policies. So with a more elaborate and more accurate assessment on the health impacts, and especially the economic impacts on health, we could have a more accurate estimation on the social cost of carbon. So you see that with more studies being put into this field, we could see that health damages would account for a more larger share of the overall SCC if we could put more resources into this field. And the second one is we have different layers of adaptation measures, some at the urban level, some at the individual level. We talked about the wearable devices. So among all these different categories of measures, what can we prioritize? So this is something that we could use those economic thinking to help us identify those most effective adaptation measures at different layers. But you have to be sure that you compare those measures at the urban level, like green roofing or like a renewed urban design. So you could easily find out like what we have studied in the past about the effectiveness of shifting working hours for outdoor workers and also issuing those stroke early systems in China. We have done this study in Tianjin, which is quite near to Beijing. So they have invested about 4 million Chinese yuan into this early warning system. And this is, well, quite some money for a city. But after running those early warning systems for consecutive 2 years, they have saved 28 million Chinese yuan for their healthcare expenditure. And 70% of the money comes from the government account, and 30% comes from the individual pocket money. So I really want to say that not all adaptation measures, they have a bad internal rate for return. We really need to make sure that we could use those economic lenses to tell people, well, some of those adaptation measures, they could really make good business and good returns. And the third one is we could integrate health co-benefits into mitigation strategies, because we all realize that mitigation is the fundamental way to tackle this health and climate change threat. So here we could help people to understand when you mitigate, well, this is the health impacts or health co-benefits that you could achieve, and this could lead to those economic benefits as well. So in our study, we have found that the study in China mentioned about how when you achieve carbon neutrality goals, what will be the mitigation costs and what will be achieved by the less health outcomes related to climate change. And we also have done this global level study, which measured if we achieve carbon neutrality by their national determined contributions by year 2050 or year 2060, then what will be the impact on heat-related labor productivity loss? And it is currently can be mentioned that for those Southeast Asia regions, their benefits from reduced economic losses from those heat-related labor productivity loss will be times of their inputs into the mitigation. So these will convey those strong messages to the decision makers that this will help them achieve those low carbon transition with those great economic returns. So my key take-home messages are on the screen. I really think that we should work with those multidisciplinary people, especially including some economic lenses, to convey this message and to convey the practical and feasibility studies to them to make these real changes happen. And we really need to be careful when we talk to different people. We really need to choose the right economic metric. And sorry, I take more time than I was assigned, but this is a general status quo of the early warning system in China. Well, overall, we had our first national climate change health adaptation action plan last year in September, and this has set an overall comprehensive planning picture for our future until to 2030. And in China, we have some pilots which have tried to start up those heat health risk early warning system in China, and some of them have direct linked with specific illnesses like stroke or cardiovascular, other kinds of cardiovascular diseases. And some of them try to send those individualized signals to your smartphones so that they can have better intervention effects. And we also see more different types of emergent climate services for health in China, including those ultraviolet and pollen concentration forecasts in the future. So, but we still lack all these different or customized and also individualized climate health risk early warning systems in China. So I really think this platform is a really beneficial one. And as I mentioned, we also work with Lancet Countdown, and we have produced those annual Lancet Countdown China report for the past 5 years, and we are in this new phase. We really want to expand to other Asian regions and countries. So if you're interested in joining the platform on Lancet Countdown Asia, please approach me, and we can talk about further collaboration opportunities. So sorry for taking longer time. So thank you. That's the end of my talk. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Prof Cai, for a very fascinating talk. We now move from the need to have an economic analysis to the development of guidelines. There are already many questions from the floor about how do we develop guidelines in the case of Sports SG. So we'll hear from Dr. Thomas Gassert. This is going to be an online talk. Dr. Gassert is an instructor in occupational and environmental medicine, environmental health at the GHHIN School of Public Health, and he'll be presenting on considerations for developing a national occupational heat exposure standard and guideline for implementation. Okay.
Friends, guests, organizers, and service workers. Many, many thanks. You have all been so gracious and professional. Dojele. The speakers and discussants have been superior these first 2 days, and presentations in this session by my esteemed colleagues, Delphine, Ken, Wenjia, have been excellent. And following me will be a fascinating study of informal sector workers by Anh Ngoc. So I'm honored to be among you and with our kind moderator, Jean Liu. The last 5 slides of this presentation deck are hidden as they are resources for your further interests in your spare time. I'm sorry I'm not with you. I'm here virtually, but I am with you in spirit, and you can reach me at tomgassert@gmail.com. My only disclosure is that I have recently been under contract with the WHO country office for a low-income member state of the Western Pacific region in the ASEAN network to draft a national heat exposure standard, a guideline for implementation, a stakeholder consultation and revisions, and a concept for funding to make it all happen for all outdoor workers. Please correct me for any errors. Okay. Let's let's focus now on the health impact of heat on workers and economies. Elevated heat can become an invisible poison and a killer at higher levels. The cure depends on human behavior. I think of heat as a fluid. We are sailors who have to navigate it. Perhaps the best tool is to use the precautionary principle, avoid paralysis by analysis, and act first. The world's 8 billion population has 4 billion workers, and 2 billion are children, soon to be workers. Heat is impacting 2.4 billion workers now. It's estimated that 2.4 trillion US dollars of productivity losses will occur by 2030, and 75% of workers in Asia and the Pacific face excessive heat. So let's talk about a framework concept for national occupational heat exposure standards and how to implement them at the grassroots. Let's start with a global code of ethics for planetary and human survival. In medicine, we have 4 principles: autonomy, beneficence, non-malfeasance, and justice. But we need 5 more with climate change: justice for future generations, more than human rights, that's all life forms and ecosystems, equity, leaving no one behind, and the precautionary principle to mitigate risk, and knowledge. We need to teach everyone about heat, especially the vulnerable. Less than 1 in 5 workers have access to occupational health services. Vulnerable workers include women, children, elders, migrants, and the disabled. So those are the guiding principles and the workers. Now the problem we all face. You saw this slide before from Joy, I think. At the start of 2025, we are at the 2015 Paris Accord preferred limit of 1.5 Celsius above pre-industrial levels, which was meant to be the 20-year average limit prior to 2050. The NDCs are not being met. The WMO in 2024 estimated the world would reach the 1.5 Celsius threshold in about 4 years. So know your country. Write a profile against which an action plan's success can be measured. Frameworks exist. Try the WHO 3Ps concept: promote, provide, and protect. Promote health, well-being, workability, adaptation, resilience. Provide 3 levels of preventive occupational health services and service capacity. Protect against climate disasters and emergencies, such as extreme heat. Use best practices. Get value for your money. Start with outdoor workers and then indoor. Have all stakeholders at the table, as well as experts and money. Use legal and health frameworks based on country knowledge. Your labor law, your national OSH Act. Use the ILO Conventions 155 and 187, which are now, since 2022, mandatory for all ILO member states, whether you've ratified them or not. And use Convention 161 on occupational health services. Convention 155 mentions the worker's right to know about heat stress. WHO partners can help develop a national health adaptation plan. Here are the links to, Here are the links to ILO 155 and 187, the mandatory OSH conventions, plus 161 on occupational health services. The UN 2030 Sustainable Development Goals are also important frameworks. SDG 3 for good health, SDG 6 for clean drinking water, 8 for decent work and economic growth, and 13 for climate action. Here's an example of a Health National Adaptation Plan, HNAP, options for outdoor work extreme heat. Establish a national occupational heat exposure standard. Monitor its implementation. Set up disease surveillance for heat-related illnesses and injuries. A registry, reporting requirements, and compensation for the workers. Develop a capacity on hazard risk assessment and control, especially for outdoor and farm workers. Raise and dedicate money. Also needed is a hydrometeorological service country profile and action plan. The key here is to provide real-time local weather data and weekly forecasts to mobile devices and heat health alert warnings. So without good knowledge, we can expect costly mistakes. Global cost of work-related disease and deaths already costs 6% of gross domestic product. Consider indoor-outdoor plans and informal versus formal work, and how to empower workers and the most vulnerable of them. This diagram I use in almost every talk I give, whatever the topic. It's about best practice of 3 levels of occupational health services. It is a dynamic teamwork cycle with primary prevention the most important and the least costly, because if it's working well, workers don't get sick or injured. The goals in yellow are decent work. The goals in yellow are decent work, decent life, health services, and climate control. We all should know the hierarchy of controls, which have both health and business value. So, of the WHO 3 Ps, this is P2, which is provide health services. There are 3 levels, as you can see here, primary, secondary, and tertiary. Primary is controlling the hazard at its source before workers get sick or injured or killed. Secondary is monitoring, like biological monitoring, medical surveillance. Tertiary is prompt medical care for injuries and illnesses. We start with a first aid team, and then go to the community, emergency response, hospital, outpatient care, and electronic record keeping. These are all the partners. Syncope is fainting from low blood pressure due to dehydration. However, when somebody loses consciousness in the heat and you lie them down and raise their legs to get blood flow back to the heart and brain, and they don't respond, you must rule out heart attack, seizure, diabetic low blood sugar, narcotic overdose. There are other reasons. And activate emergency response immediately. The key difference for suspecting heat stroke are changes in mental status. That is the differential that doctors look at. And it's not just the known heat stress illnesses, but also other heat-related risks. On the right, falls, head injury, skin burns, kidney failure. You need other ICD diagnostic codes for these, but the secondary initial cause of the injury was high heat exposure, which is ICD-11 code QD84Y. So enter both codes. Sun-exposed surfaces such as asphalt, brick, and sand can reach temperatures as high as 82 degrees. At this temperature, 3rd degree skin burn is immediate. Here's what a doctor's medical record of a heat-related illness and injury should look like. It should include, sometimes we call it a SOAP note. And here are the key WHO International Classification of Disease, ICD, diagnostic codes that doctors should use in filling the medical record report. This in turn gets reported through the Department of Labor, Ministry of Labor, and the insurance compensation system, and becomes the data that drives the epidemiology of understanding heat-related disease in your country. The ILO in 2022 issued the occupational disease list that now includes diagnostic and exposure criteria, and it's free. You can download the PDF, and here's the link. And the page is on heat diagnoses. Also, look at standards from other nations. They vary quite a bit. There's no international model yet. Here is the 2024 proposed US OSHA National Occupational Heat Standard criteria. In the United States, it has been a many years process to develop a heat standard. The goal, all named industries and employers develop a written Heat Illness and Injury Protection Program, HIIPP. Scan down the list on the left, and you will see key components for a national heat standard, which OSHA is currently basing on heat index thresholds for initial heat and high heat. However, OSHA does prefer that the WBGT index be used to include radiant or sunlight heat and air movement. The problem here is that so many people, so many industries, workplaces, and workers do not understand WBGT, but they will need to learn it. So here you can see on the heat index, it's an air temperature adjusted for relative humidity in the shade with no wind. It approximates the WBGT, but only in the shade and with almost no air movement. In the sunlight, you must add up to 7.5 degrees Celsius to the heat index to get the WBGT estimate, depending on cloud cover, mostly. And here you can see that many of the national heat standards I've seen refer to the WBGT using the ACGI, American Congress of Governmental Industrial Hygienists Global Guide for Work Rest Cycles, which differ according to whether you're fully acclimatized or not, and what is your workload. There are 4 categories which represent metabolic heat generated by the worker doing the job. These heat threshold and action limits are designed to keep the worker's core body temperature in its normal physiologic range of 36 to 38 degrees Celsius, core temperature, and relies on the employer using the 3 key principles of rest, shade, and water drinking, as well as other administrative tools. So you can peruse these charts, calculators, toolkits, apps, and hand instruments. But I want to draw your attention to the latest mobile app developed for global use by the American Industrial Hygiene Association, now in its first field-tested iteration, issued July 2024. It yields very local, real-time WBGT and 5-day forecasts. The user has to enter personal data on sun, shade, clothing, PPE, and then gets advised instantly. Yes. So other issues that must be considered include night work to avoid day heat. It has its own problems: sleep disruption, poor visibility. If the employer controls housing and transport, they must also make it adequately cool for recovery from hot work. Assure safe drinking water, free of harmful chemicals and pathogens. Prepare for climate disasters, storms, floods, fires, etc. What about the confusion about temperature numbers? Everyone needs to understand global ambient action levels, human core thermoregulation. How are we to integrate these into a national heat standard and action plan? Shall we author a model worker heat exposure standard, perhaps an ILO convention? Or should all nations decide their own standards and their own science and protective action levels? We need a balanced approach on the science, which is more global, a legal framework in general, and adaptation for the local conditions, cultures, language, how work is done, the social dialogue. How can we avoid double standards about hazardous exposures? We have the lesson from chemicals being our teacher on double standards between nations. Equity in health is essential. Should public health heat alert warnings be the same as worker health heat alert warnings? Which environmental weather temperature standards should GHHIN endorse? Where can nations get funding to develop their legal OSH heat standard and to make sure they get implemented? Can we brainstorm portable, wireless best technology for weather data, warnings, wearables for workers? How can AI help accelerate us toward good solutions? How about a quick reference chart of key facts about temperature measurements to sort out the confusion? How about use of body thermometers in the workplace? Surface thermometers of the ear, forehead, but then you must add at least 0.5 Celsius to estimate core temperature. Basically, it's not reliable, but it may help assess risk in the short term. This is the last slide, so we'll keep it up for a couple minutes. Lead with compassion swiftly, there's no time to lose. Educate everyone. Empower workers to care for themselves and employers to care for their workers. Develop real-time portable WBGT and physiologic wearables. Fund standard making and implementation. Look to Vision Zero. No heat-related illnesses or deaths. No greenhouse gas emissions. Protect planet Earth. Resource slides follow. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Gassert, for your presentation. Our last speaker today is going to talk about the health impact of climate change on informal outdoor workers in urban Vietnam. So this is by Dr. Anh Vu, the Research Director of Climate Change Lead in the UK National Centre for Social Research. So this picks up on a topic many of us have been talking about, who are the most vulnerable, who are affected by rising heat levels.
Good morning, everyone. It's such a long morning for everyone, I know. It's quite overwhelming with a lot of data information. So it is my true honor to be here at this very important event today. And today I will be addressing a very pressing issue, a critical and timely issue, that is the impacts of the extreme weather on the precarious informal outdoor workers in megacities, with the focus on Vietnam. And I think yesterday and today, you have a great chance to listen a lot about migrant workers, outdoor workers. They are among the most vulnerable, most exposed groups to climate change impacts, but also to climate solutions. So, and it is a part of our big project funded by the Wellcome Trust, and I'm leading this project at this moment. So let me start. Sorry, where is here? Let me start by my presentation by showing you these photos. These are the real photos that our project team captured from our fieldwork. They are not the AI generated. I have to emphasize that. So who are these workers? So for the past few days, you have listened a lot about outdoor workers, precarious, informal workers. So what exactly the faces of these workers? So these are the focus population of our project. They are the street vendors, they are precarious, low-paid construction workers, and they are porters and motorbike taxi riders. And so why we are focusing on these groups? So you know that, I think the keynote speaker this morning saying that, and it actually resonates with our project as well, the informal sector, and then these precarious outdoor workers, they are the backbone of our urban economies. And they are the actors who keep our cities moving, but they are facing daily struggles. They are facing precarious job insecurity, chronic job insecurity, income insecurity, limited social protection, and all these pre-existing vulnerabilities are exacerbated by climate change impacts. And the key thing is that we know so little about their health risk and their vulnerabilities, and the policies that aim to support these outdoor workers are still underdeveloped. So, and these are some pictures that we capture from their living conditions, and we have the ethical consent from them already, so no worries. So our project running from, let me say very briefly about this project. So it's not really focused on heat, but heat is among the factors that we capture in our project. So the project tried to examine the health risk and adaptive capacity of these informal outdoor workers in the 4 big cities, large cities in Vietnam. You can see from the screen, Hanoi, Da Nang, Ho Chi Minh City, and Cần Thơ. Cần Thơ is the hub of the Mekong River Delta, and I think many of you know about this. And we conducted this project in collaboration with the local partners in Vietnam, and we work directly with the worker communities in Vietnam as well. And what is unique about this project is that we, apart from quantitative survey and secondary data, we try to co-construct a new evidence base with the outdoor workers, with these precarious outdoor workers, in a very detailed, I have to say that time-consuming process, but we wanted to do it so that we can understand with the deep insight into the risk and vulnerabilities that these outdoor workers are facing. And this is also an opportunity to put these outdoor workers at the center of the research process so that we can enhance their agency. And they have a chance to speak out their own narratives, their own experience about what they're facing. And this project it's not just about data creation. From the day one of the project, we work closely with the policymakers and worker societies to ensure that our data, our research evidence will lead to the actionable policy recommendations and outcomes. So in the next few slides, I will present some socio-demographic characteristics of these outdoor workers. So our first survey, the project kicked off in February 2024. So it has been a few months already, but we have managed to conduct a first survey with the outdoor workers. And I will present some key findings from this very first survey with you today. So we surveyed 400 informal outdoor workers in these 4 cities, and construction workers, street vendors, motorbike taxi riders, and porters. And you can see that from the screen, the outdoor workers, our survey that showed that the outdoor workers tend to be older than the general labor population, and I think it's also resonant with the previous keynote speaker, and over 55% of the outdoor workers are above 45 years old, and with many existing 60 years old. And so this finding raises concerns about the increasing health vulnerabilities of the older workers, especially given their physical exposure to extreme heat and other weather events. But you see that even this age also varied across the occupation. You can see the street vendors, many of them are more than 60 years old. And in terms of educational attainment, compared to the general labor force, outdoor workers tend to have lower levels of formal education, and the majority of respondents have completed only lower secondary school, around 50%, or primary school. And a small proportion have no formal education at all, and even while fewer than 10% have gone beyond high school or attended university. But this also varied across occupation. And this variation is quite striking because street vendors, as you can see that street vendors are the least educated group with a significant proportion having only primary education or no education at all. And motorbike taxi riders and porters are slightly better educated, but still mostly fall into the lower secondary level. So what is the implication here? So this limited education has a cascading effect, right? Because this limited education will restrict outdoor workers' access to higher, safer occupations, higher paying jobs, and it also makes them less likely to access formal employment protections or adaptation training programs. Our data survey data also shows that the outdoor work is highly gendered. You can see that the street vendors are predominantly female. They occupy 79%, and so why street vendors tend to be female? Because they also reflect the nature of the gender of the gender norms and the gender nature of this kind of work. So street vendors tend to be female because they have to carry dual responsibilities. They have to take care of their elderly people, their children, so domestic caring responsibilities. And the construction and porters tend to be dominated by male. So this gender nature of the outdoor work is telling us that we need to take into account the gender-specific vulnerabilities in the policy responses. And I think we can discuss this further in our Q&A section. And the outdoor workers are also defined by long working hours. So only 1/5 of respondents work less than 8 hours per day, and nearly half, 50% work 8 to 10 hours, and a substantial proportion work over 10 to 12 hours per day. And a smaller but also notable group works over 12 hours per day. And I think that I need to move to the next slides. And you can see here, what is also very striking is that many workers have been engaging in the outdoor work for more than a decade. It's like for more than 10 years. As you can see the data from the screen here, they have been engaging in the outdoor work for such a long time. And it indicates the long-term exposure to the environmental hazards. So I want to summarize some socio-demographic characteristics of the outdoor workers in our survey. So you can see that the outdoor workers tend to be older than the general working population. They tend to be less well educated. They are temporary residents. They live in the low quality rent accommodation and mostly male. And they work long hours, long days, and they have long-term engagement in the outdoor work. Sorry. So in the next part, I want to talk about the relationship between the extreme weather, outdoor working, and health. The heat exposure patterns among outdoor workers in our survey in Vietnam reveal a quite concerning trend. And data shows that most workers work during the morning. 84% work from 6 to 10 a.m. and afternoon from 82% work in the afternoon from 2 to 6 p.m. But however, you can see from the screen that 58.8% work during the hottest hours, the hottest hour of the day when temperature are at their peak. So this highlights not just their work patterns, but also the high level of heat exposure that they are facing. And the significant number of workers are active during these peak heat hours raises serious concerns about their health and their safety, especially when the climate change is getting worse. So the certain working population, outdoor workers are more vulnerable than the others. As you can see, women, for instance, face compounded risk due to physiological factors, and dual responsibilities, with 28% reporting health issues compared to 19.9% of men. Sorry, where is that? Sorry, I messed up with the slide, sorry. Yeah, so the women experience heat-related health issues more than men, and workers over 60 years old experience heat-related health issues at a rate more than 7 times higher than those under 30 years old. And I think it's too much information here. I don't want to overwhelm you with all this detail. And when we ask them about their existing health condition, and you can see that 50% of the outdoor workers have chronic medical conditions. And more than 90% have faced health issues due to extreme weather event. And only 27% have access professional medical care when they're ill. And one of the striking data that we found out is that more than almost 40% of the outdoor workers, they use their own pocket money to buy the voluntary medical insurance. But very few of them choose to use it when they get sick. And the reason why they do not use medical insurance when they get sick, because of many reasons, because of the institutional barriers, because they do not have time to go to take leave to go to the hospital, and they tend to use self-treatment when they get sick. I think in terms of the awareness and adaptive capacities that outdoor workers, this is also one of the key components we try to investigate in the survey. You know, what are the adaptive capacities? What are the awareness of the outdoor workers in terms of dealing with heat, with the other extreme events? And it's quite concerning because we found out that 90% reported that they have no knowledge or very little skill to deal with the climate change. And when we ask about their adaptive capacities and what are the coping measures they use when they encounter the weather extreme events, and you can see that they have employed a wide range of coping measures. Sorry, the text is so small I cannot read. So, for example, the majority, they reported that they drinking water frequently. So it's also in line with a lot of with the previous presentation, and they also wearing, you know, light color clothing, etc. But when what is concerning is what makes us very concerned is that when they face when they are in sickness, when they are ill, they have very little support. They have very little access to the medical support. So let me sum up my all these precarity and vulnerabilities of the outdoor workers in our survey. So what are the key takeaway messages here? The first is about that they are the outdoor workers, the precarious outdoor workers are among the most vulnerable, most exposed to the climate change impacts, and also to climate solutions. And especially the street vendors and the elderly, they face the highest vulnerability to climate change. And the majority, 74.5% of the outdoor workers experience income reduction due to extreme weather, and with street vendors and the elderly being most affected. And the second key takeaway is that the gender nature in outdoor work. Women face greater challenges than men in balancing work, childcare, and health protection in extreme weather. And they have lower endurance in heat and humidity, making them more vulnerable to heat-related illnesses. And the third key takeaway is about the unequal adaptive capacities among the outdoor workers. The adaptive capacities is very varied among these occupations because of age, across age and gender. And younger workers adapt better, while older workers face greater income losses. And construction workers use more protective measures, and while street vendors rely on traditional methods. And what are the traditional methods they're using? This is what we want to explore further in the qualitative, in-depth interviews later. Okay. And the next key takeaway that I want to highlight is that the outdoor workers, they tend to normalize their health risk. And many of them reported that they think having heat stroke or heat-related health illness is a part of their job, that they do not have to complain or seek help when they face this issue. So the normalization of health risk or heat-related issues is quite concerning, and I think we need to take into account this finding when we design the policy responses. And obviously, it is not really novel finding, but it's also in line with many findings that the keynote speech have presented. These outdoor workers have extremely limited access to the resources, because they are not protected by the labor law. They are informal. They are precarious. So they have so limited access to the protection systems. And government and social support is really minimal, with only 19.3% receiving health care and 1.5% receiving some kind of support for their livelihoods. And the migrant workers, not all the outdoor workers are migrant workers, but they occupied 51% in our survey, and they face additional challenges in accessing public services due to the registration issues. Because the migrant workers in the cities, they need to register with the local authorities. But because many of them do not register with the authorities, and because of the household certificates they exist in Vietnam, they do not have access to the existing supporting system from the government. Sorry, I overwhelmed you a lot of data about the demographic factors, and I think I messed up some slides over there. I couldn't find the key thing that I want to talk, but I'm very happy to discuss with you further in the Q&A section. Thank you very much.
So we stand between you and lunch, so unfortunately, we're not going to have a Q&A, but many of you asked very good questions, so give me 3 minutes, the luxury of 3 minutes, to try to summarize and also integrate your questions, and then you can grill the speakers later. So a huge thanks to our speakers, Delphine, Ken, Wenjia, Thomas, and Andrew. If I were to summarize the key themes that I kept hearing, the first is that, as we just heard from Dr. Andrew, the impact of heat at work is not equal, and especially affects the people who are the most vulnerable in society already, those with poor working conditions in the first place. And from Dr. Cai's research, we found that the construction industry is particularly adversely affected at every end of the stick, whether you look at health, financial impact. And that's of particular concern as we think about urbanization all over the world. The second key point, and it's very important on this day where we're talking about solutions, is that when you look at the solutions for heat at work, our speakers spoke of many different solutions. We really need all hands on deck here. Two of our speakers, Delphine and Thomas, talked about the codes, the practices, the guidelines that were very much customized to each settings. And our speakers, many of the questions were actually about all the details about how you came up with your codes. Delphine, one of the top questions was, why 33 degrees Celsius in particular? So yes, with all these codes, we can debate the specifics of it. With Dr. Ken, we really got introduced to innovation and technology, the use of sensors, the use of ventilation garments, and with Dr. Cai also, the idea of warning systems, using technology and innovation to try to mitigate. Dr. Ken, you'll be very interested that there's a lot of questions about when we come to T-shirts, should we put them in cold water or room temperature water? So there's a lot of curiosity about innovation and technology. Finally, with Prof Cai, we heard about how do we, with all these solutions, what is the 30,000 feet view? How do we come in and how do we choose and prioritize and increase the urgency for action? And that you gave us a tool, the economic analysis, really allows us to see everything at one shot and make informed decisions in that way. Most of our questions, for all of you asked, thank you for taking the time to ask. Many of the questions were about implementation. I am from the Center for Evidence and Implementation, so that makes me very interested. For guidelines, how do we get workplaces to comply? Because the individual risk at a single workplace is fairly low. How do we get compliance at that level? For how do we rely on WGT at scale, right? We don't even have those measurements available to us often. For technology, will people wear the T-shirts? Is it comfortable? What's the user perception? So a lot about, when we come up with solutions, how do we implement them to make sure they're successful? So I'm going to hand over the time to lunch, and please find the fantastic speakers who have spoken to follow up on these discussions. Thank you very much to the organizers for organizing us.